What you don't realize is it's only safe for me to do that in public.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are Irenicast. I'm Jeff.
It's your boy, Alan.
I'm Bonnie.
It's Casey.
This is Rajeev.
On the first and third Tuesday of every month,
We bring to you our perspectives
On theology and culture.
From a post-evangelical lens.
Thank you for joining us for another conversation to provoke your progressive Christian imagination. This week, we're going to get right into it, and we're going to be discussing white supremacy and evangelical Christianity. And for our segment, we're going to bring back one that we did recently called I Would But, which always leads to a lot of fun and exposes who is the asshole group, which, spoiler, last time it was me. So to guide us through this conversation, Bonnie, our resident professor, we're just going to call you that now, I'm just saying that, is going to guide us through some questions that she's developed to kind of get the conversation rolling, and then we will see where we end up. So Bonnie, take it away.
Yeah, boy, I think that we're at a time where people are becoming more and more aware of white supremacy in general, right? White privilege, and it's long overdue. And so it's important for us, I think, to think about our own religious heritage and how that may have contributed, not only contributed, but probably was a key factor in supporting white supremacy in this country. And we talked about white supremacy and evangelical Christianity. However, evangelical Christianity is a very big umbrella. So we should almost say evangelical Christianities probably. And we're talking specifically about white evangelical Christianity and the role that it's played in American life. So yeah, let's start with the question. Like, as you look back and reflect on your time, either growing up or somehow becoming connected with evangelical Christianity and the contexts that you lived in, where did you see white supremacy or anti-Blackness show up? How did it show up? What did it look like?
As we get into the conversation, Bonnie, I know that we really want to focus in on evangelicalism, but I think the truth is Christianity has a long history of racism. I mean, Martin Luther was like a major anti-Semite, and he was like the founder of the Reformation. Although we're going to focus on evangelicalism, I really just want to lift up the fact that Christianity itself, for a very long time, has had an issue with racism.
European Christianity. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Casey.
I went through and looked at all of my old Awana books. Awana is like the Baptist Boy Scouts kind of, where they make you memorize stuff. And like I combed through what I was taught in first grade all the way through when I was a senior in high school. And there was all sorts of like conversations about all the ways that I was sinful as a human being, even in first grade. Like, you're a sinner for all of these reasons. And never once was racism ever talked about. And even in the books themselves, the way they're presented, at least in one book that I was looking at from when I was in third grade, all of the kids are white in every single picture. We've used the concept of like Native American identity as like a kind of kitschy theme through the whole thing, but really centered whiteness, even like aesthetically inside of the book, and talked about patriotism. And here's all the founding fathers are all white, and then all these kids supporting the patriotic people. And I mean, we learned how to recycle and use our arms for like lane changes and stuff, and then talked about how we're completely and irredeemably corrupt, and even if we try to be good, God won't accept us. But never like once ever talked about racism. So if I brought that up now, I can almost hear people from my past saying, well, that's not a conversation you want to have with a kid, about racism. And then I would say the conversations we were having were absolutely inappropriate. That like, I'm falling off this irredeemable cliff, and God doesn't love me unless I say the right things, and then I can make it into God's love. So I think even beginning to question where white supremacy showed up in my past, there's so many places, but like that's one little avenue into it. I do know that my church was like mostly white, and I even heard, man, I don't know how much I want to say, but I guess it's my past and I can speak about it, but I don't want to talk about other people's experiences. We did have, some people of color in our church, and nobody listened to their experiences. From my perspective as a kid, I heard a lot of adults talking about pulling the race card and that kind of stuff in the midst of, and when I look back and I think about my church growing up, it's like, it is completely made for white people. And in our missions trips and stuff, we were exporting whiteness as much as anything else, going down to Mexico and saying all of these, all these people in Mexico are not Christians because they're not Christians like us. And then literally trying to recreate what our culture was part and parcel with spreading the good news. So, I mean, like, I could talk for hours. I think a lot of us could, but there's just a lot, and it's a little daunting to think about.
I think one of the things that Alan is saying that is really important for us to elevate is the idea that he can't speak exactly to when he first experienced it because he was so enculturated in it, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's what the demon of whiteness does. It's like American, right? It's the same concept. You go to Mexico to make them Christians like you. You hear white folks say, we want everyone to be American, which is a blanket statement for stay where you are because we just want to elevate whiteness. It's deeply rooted, and it doesn't make itself clearly known in a lot of ways until you look back and say, why was this the only conversations we were having? I mean, we spent more time as young adults talking about not masturbating than we did talking about confronting racism or how to navigate that.
And there are instances from my past where it was made known, not just an invisible thing, but something that did show up. I mean, in seminary, hearing that the fact that there were other perspectives doing theology from like a white-centered thing was held up as an example of like the end times. Like, we're in the end times because there's womanist theologies and black theology and this type of theology. And so there was a literal, like, from seminary down, effort to retain this like Eurocentric kind of power hold on church, and how much can we say is like church and how much is society or culture? It's all like intermingled for me. I know that my dad was integrated as a kid. They went through integration, and he was, bused across the city to go to a different elementary school. And that affected my family in like a negative way. And that was a story that I've like learned later in my life. And how much is that, like, because Christianity is such a part of culture, it's almost like, where is the blending stop? Is it just the church, or is it society? So there's questions I have around that.
For me, it was the church that I was formed in lived in an area that most people wouldn't describe it this way, but that is heavily segregated. My wife and I lived in the same area, and we went to different high schools. And I went to the high school that was primarily Latinx, and she went to the high school that was primarily white, and that was reflective of the communities that we were in. And the church that I grew up in started out in a neighborhood that was primarily full of people of color. And as they got enough money, as they got enough pledges for their building, they promptly built into the whiter area of the city. And that was a story that was very common. So it was like separate ourselves from the community, but then go back into the community from a distance to provide charity, food, so that we can tell ourselves that we're doing a good job. And then the first church that I worked in as a youth minister was the same deal. It was a church that was huge and in the middle of a neighborhood with primarily people of color. But if you came on a Sunday morning, you wouldn't know it, because
that's right.
There were a lot of wealthy people in the church that came from different parts of the area that did not live in the area that the church was in for a lot of different reasons. And I didn't pick up those things in the middle. I think, Casey, what you said is spot on. We're so entrenched in it that it wasn't even a second thought. But then reflecting back on it, even the way, as Alan was mentioning, that we did missions, it was always the people that were less fortunate, almost always were people of color. And there was there was this desire to repent, and there was this desire to call out institutions for what they were doing wrong, but there was never a desire to be reflective about the institution that they were themselves and how they've been complicit in those things. And growing up in a Pentecostal background, it was striking to me how many times we would do prayer walks. Like in one of the churches I worked in, there was even a prayer walk around the local courthouse. It was this large oak tree where I guess back in the day they did lynchings in the public square. And this group of prayer warriors, is what they called themselves, would do these prayer walks around it to repent for this evil that the city had done. But never once an idea or a thought of, well, what about our church? What about our tradition? And coming from Pentecostalism, Assemblies of God in particular, is a huge history of racism. We had a church split over racism. The Azusa Street revival that sparked Pentecostalism in our country is the founder of it was essentially cast out of his own revival because of the color of his skin. So these were like deep roots in what we were doing. And a lot of times, the only time it was expressed, at least in my tradition in the Assemblies of God, we had a combined service with the local Black church who was part of a denomination that had separated from Assemblies of God. And we did a combined service, and that solved the world's problems. And it was, and I say that sarcastically, just in case that tone didn't come through. But it's always this, you're looking for an event, but there is no concern to do the real work. And, yeah, I mean, I guess to answer your question, Bonnie, that's been my experience coming through and seeing evangelicalism connected to, or my version of evangelicalism connected to racism.
I think, the arc for me is kind of interesting because there are moments where my head and my heart are like a little bit at odds. And I think about the election of Donald Trump, and right afterwards, there was a skit on Saturday Night Live. Dave Chappelle was the host. His monologue was great. It's one for the record books. But there's a skit where Dave Chappelle is sitting with these white cast members, and they're in a living room watching the election returns.
Oh yeah,
and all these white people are going nuts, right? They're like, "What the?" And Dave's just like, yeah, I mean, this is who
we are.
How do you not know this? Right. And Chris Rock then walks in, and, it's just this great contrast. So, with what's happening right now in the United States and the world, there's these awakenings where in my head, it's like, yes, this is really good that people are coming alive. But in my gut, I'm just like, God damn it, where the f*** have you been? It's taken how many innocent lives to realize this? So there's this, tension of being patient and nurturing and encouraging, and then also like, wow. I mean, there's a lot more to say about the historical arc. And there's, as far as the evangelical church in America, my observation, because I sort of am a product of it, but not really formally grew up. Seventh-day Adventism doesn't consider itself an evangelical religion, but there's like colonialism, which a lot of you have talked about with these mission trips and so on, and it's really culturalism. It's presenting a culture as superior, and Jesus is the Lord of that culture. And then the way I see evangelicalism in America is sort of the inside crowd. It's sort of like the Klan meeting.
Yep,
it's there. And they can't really turn away people of color because that would expose them quickly. But Alan, like you recounted, they're there, but they're marginalized even further and not heard. So it's almost like this open structure of whiteness that asserts itself in every sector and has now, you look at what happens in DC and those meetings with these evangelical leaders who surround Trump. And it's like, well, here we are. To me, it feels a little bit like a page out of Revelation, which I've, kind of long dismissed as sci-fi. But it's like, wait a second. Sometimes there's some merit here.
Are we talking a progressive Christian reboot of Left Behind? Should we do it?
I think so. I mean, I get triggered in that too. The whole like abomination of desolation in the temple, like making a sacrifice of all the innocents in the street to get across the street to the church. That's triggering as hell.
I just want to really lift up again what you said, Rajeev, about this is just the new model for the Klansmen meeting. Even, where I'm serving is a very conservative area. And there are some students at a pretty conservative Christian college in my area who are getting ready to come out and speak their truth. And they're deeply afraid of what backlash they will receive from the community and the big churches that they attend. It just speaks exactly to what you're saying. You can be here. You can be here in the ways that we allow you to be here, but don't you step out of line.
Well, and one thing that in my mind I wanted to say, but then didn't say it, is in that sweeping up of evangelicalism, a lot of decent, good-hearted people are swept up in it.
Totally.
And so they're, and then they get to an age of sort of accountability, and then they're having to process and discern and contend with their whole community that raised them, and wonder, and that can't be a comfortable position to be in.
And again, I think, like you're saying, a lot of those good and decent people, because whiteness is not named, right? Because it lives in the shadows, they have no idea what they're supporting.
That's exactly what I was thinking while you were talking. That's like, I can almost hear everybody who's on this other side of the fence saying, no, we're not racist. No, systemic racism's not a thing. No, white evangelicalism's not white. It's that it is invisible. And I almost want to speak to them like throughout this whole conversation, because it's like, you hear things about, we didn't hear anything racist in church. And I was like, well, did you hear anything anti-racist in church? Like, oh, we didn't hear that whiteness was the main thing. It's like, well, did you hear that whiteness wasn't the main thing? I mean, like, did you hear, like you just said, Casey, whiteness wasn't named. I mean, never named. Even I can remember being like, oh, being called white was weird. Like that's in my memory personally in church, that whiteness was so unnamed that I couldn't even call myself white because it was this invisible, powerful thing, even though it had legal categories back in the day. And
it seeks to not be named.
It does.
Yeah. I think the journey for white people to be able to call themselves white, I think that you can be aware that there's a problem in the world. You can become aware of racism and still not claim whiteness as one's own identity. And then connected to whiteness is anti-blackness. And then, I think about my own tradition growing up. All of the Bible characters and all of the Bible, children's Bibles, and in we called it Sabbath school classroom, they were all white, dressed in, I don't know what kind of Roman garb. I don't know what kind of like robes, where all that comes from, what cultures those come from. It's probably a mixture of things. But everybody was white. And what that does to a person, to be able to identify in that way with God and with the stories of these figures that we venerate, it makes you begin to think that the world is supposed to be ordered according to your culture. And that is such a violent way to exist in the world. In a tradition, and I know I'm not really sharing much about my former context. I'm just like feeling all of this right now in this moment, is in a tradition where we lift up Jesus as nonviolent, and we read these texts. There's neither Greek nor Hebrew, male or female, slave or free, which is has depths of context and meaning. It seems like white evangelical Christianity is just such a violent stance in the world. Mm-hmm. And people perhaps are becoming awakened to that just a little bit. But because each of us can't claim, well, I'm speaking for myself, because it's been so hard to claim whiteness, my own skin as being white and my identity as being white, then whenever that gets pointed out, I begin to feel really uncomfortable. and I start to sweat a little bit, and the whole world is sort of, well, not the whole world, but my world is sort of programmed to keep white bodies from feeling uncomfortable. And so then things get shifted, and we talk about well-meaning people. We talk about, getting sort of entrapped in something that isn't our fault. And I'm not really a racist. It's just, we sort of get into those modes of thinking and never let ourselves feel really uncomfortable and experiencing what discomfort feels like.
I'm still stuck at the overwhelming evidence part. I feel like there's a lot of people who won't listen until there's an overwhelming, preponderous evidence that is just undeniable for them to stop and look and be like, okay, yeah, whiteness is a bad thing. Okay, yes, this is a real thing. So I don't know. I know we're talking about personal stuff, but I have so much energy toward talking about the fact that white was a legal category in our country. We created that. We said whiteness was a legal category and it had legal ramifications. So whiteness is a thing. We went on a an immersion trip, Casey, Bonnie, and I, and visited this space where they talked about indigenous folks being renamed, being schooled under Christian education in California, taking people out of their languages and their cultures, erasing that kind of stuff, teaching people English and changing their names of their streets, their towns. That's a violent act. And and you're right, Bonnie, and I don't know if it was Rajeev who talked about the violence of it, but it's a violent act to rename people like that. And that's something that we enshrined in baptism. You'd baptize someone and give them a new name that's more fitting to the dominant culture. And as far as schooling goes, I mean, when the integration stuff kicked in the 50s and 60s, that's when private schools took off. There was more enrollment in private schools in the 50s and 60s because of forced integration than at any other point in American history. Throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it only slowly changed because people had to go through lawsuits. They didn't change because the law changed. They changed because they were sued at different points to actually open up and integrate their schools, to the point where Bob Jones, a huge evangelical Bible college, didn't actually have forced integration until the 80s, the middle of the 80s. And then they changed their policies on interracial dating in the year 2000. So if you want to talk about an overwhelming evidence of white supremacy throughout the history of the church, we could do that. But a lot of people, when they hear the stuff about the invisibility of whiteness and stuff, they just completely discount it. You almost have to see 1,000 videos of people being devalued before you'll even accept that the systemic question is real. And maybe that's where I'm getting a little angry and a little bit upset about it. But
well, I'm just fascinated. I'm fascinated. Jeff talks about growing up Pentecostal. For those who believe in a spirit realm, you should be the first ones to be able to name this shit, right? You should be if you are the ones who experience the darkness and who can cast it out in the name of Jesus. I am quite surprised that Pentecostal folks aren't picking up on this demonic spirit, right?
Oh, they were when it was overt and when it was someone else, but never ourselves. I heard several times casting out the demon of racism. Racism was always apparent. Right. I think because of our connection to a lot of black churches, but it was a thing of the past. It was the enemy. It couldn't be us. Yeah. I'm curious, going back to kind of what Alan was saying, and really I'm curious, Rajeev and Bonnie in particular, Alan speaking of schools and education, and I know that was, from our conversations, that was a central tenet of Seventh-day Adventism. How did you see those race issues play out in kind of that tradition, and especially in the education part?
It's such an interesting mixed bag, because the Seventh-day Adventist Church historically were abolitionists. Ellen White, the founder of the church, she had sent her son. He was on fire for abolition. He went into the Deep South. I mean, there are historical documents showing the Adventist connection to the Underground Railroad. So there was a lot of that kind of work. And Ellen, she wrote a book on education, and the Adventist education system came out of that, which is, there were some really interesting and valuable thoughts in that book, but it was part of a larger movement in America. And the school I went through Adventist school, K through undergrad. The high school that I went to was in the Washington, D.C. area, is one of the most diverse schools in the whole state. Seventh-day Adventist schools historically were built to be integrated schools as a way to combat that. But it's in this private parochial space, which is also problematic in its own way. But so it was a mixed bag. And it's not like it was void of racism. There were schools that had to be set up to be Black schools because the mixed schools weren't doing it.
And not only not void of racism, but there were even whole conferences that were segregated. There were Black conferences and white conferences. So I think it's impossible in the United States to be Christian and not have your Christianity deeply embedded in white supremacy.
I agree.
I mean, we are the country of slavery. And it was preachers. There were preachers and theologies that supported the institution of slavery. We haven't even begun to address that, I don't think, as Christians. The legacy that we live in and the way we perpetuate this legacy because we don't want to admit that we're part of the problem.
I just want to, in case there are Seventh-day Adventists listening, the Black conferences in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, there's real controversy because folks within the Black conferences, that was done out of a movement of Black people, by Black people, for Black people, in order to create structures for self-governance. And then there was others that are like, if we can't be part of the main group and exercise our voice in the main group, then what's the point? So there was some real tension. So it's not entirely a structure that is anti-Black. It can be argued that it was very pro-Black.
Well, my question would be, and I think that, again, I'm not familiar with Seventh-day Adventists, but I think that problem happens a lot, where then the white person turns around and says, well, you want to be anti-racist, but you're creating your own thing, instead of analyzing, well, why did they feel the need to do that in the first place? And what kind of environment have we created to make a group feel like they need to separate themselves to be safe?
Yeah. I mean, you just read some Malcolm X.
Did any of you ever hear anything about slaveholder religion?
Yeah, that's
in your contexts.
My brain is so slow this morning. I'm really struggling. But Bonnie, when you were talking about the theologies that upheld slavery, I was woefully old when I found out. And my life has been biblical studies and theology. That's just been what I've been immersed from the moment from first grade up. And I never heard the stories of slaveholders sending preachers to speak to their slaves from the Bible to tell them to be, good slaves for their masters, and quoting different parts of the New Testament. It blew my mind, and I was way too old when I learned that the Bible was used to defend slavery. The Southern Baptist Convention was created because of wanting to hold on to slavery. That's the reason they became into existence in the first place. And I think it was Frederick Douglass. I think he was a former slave. He was even wrestling with, do we disseminate scriptures amongst the slaves? Because they weren't allowed to have the Bible, that's for sure, because there's all these stories of liberation and, justice and Exodus and things like that were sung and were talked about it as being like a homeopathic cure. Like you could take the Bible, the biblical stories, and there's stories of liberation, and there's also stories of oppression. And so it's like there's the poison in it, and there's also a cure in it as well. And so taking that in was a path toward liberation, but it also stung with a little bit of the oppression that was being used. So yeah, I don't remember how old I was, but it was definitely when I was an adult when I discovered the Bible had been used that way. What about you all? When did you hear that slaveholders preached at slaves in our country or used the Bible to defend slavery?
I can't remember not knowing that.
Well, then maybe I come from the most white supremacist place out of all of us. Maybe that's why I'm angry and overcaffeinated.
But just because you have the knowledge doesn't mean anybody's doing anything about it.
Totally. You know, I watched there's one video of a woman speaking. She's at the end of it, she says, you know, you're lucky that people just want equality and not vengeance. And I felt that, like, I never had honestly considered that my whole life. Righting the wrongs of oppression in churches, that's not a conversation that's really being had, from what I can tell. I've seen like racism seminars and stuff about how not to mess up and get sent to HR, but I haven't seen like a systemic like undoing of white supremacy in our circles.
How was systemic oppression dealt with? Of any kind? Like, was it even acknowledged? Like, if sin is the problem, because there's a lot of conversations about sin. If sin is the problem, like, what's the cure? What's the fix?
Jesus and prayer.
Breaking
and that
up
was
with
it.
white Jesus, right, Rajeev?
That's right.
It was
Hashtag,
Well, I remember it.
Hashtag break up with white Jesus.
Yeah. The church that I grew up in prided itself on being one of the first churches to integrate. But it was a dominantly white church for sure. And it tried to bring in speakers with different perspectives from time to time. I remember one time an African-American pastor came in and, man, he just let loose on the colonialism of Seventh-day Adventism. And it was great. I mean, it was so interesting because what I'm calling now the persons of culture, we gathered at the front of the church. Like, we found each other to talk about, holy crap, we actually heard this here. And we want more of this. And then like the next week, they got up and did sort of this disclaimer on what was preached the week before. And was like, whoa. And I was thinking to my parents, I wasn't quite old enough to like just decide to go somewhere else. And I was thinking, well, maybe my parents will leave and we'll find a place that's more safe and uplifting this way. But they didn't. They were pretty entrenched. And, you know, I think the desire to be part of whiteness is something that a lot of immigrants contend with. And my family, not just our nuclear family, but our extended family that emigrated, were all very, very much caught up in that for a long time.
Rajeev, not that you have to explain this to me, but I'm really curious about what you said in terms of that desire from immigrants to fit into whiteness. I mean, that's not exactly how you worded it, but I don't know if you can even explain that. It's an experience that I hear people say a lot, that I just am curious if you would be willing to offer some insight into kind of some of the practical examples of that and just how that plays out internally for you in your spirituality and in everyday life.
Well, I mean, it's really painfully obvious. You know, listen to me speak. See the way I dress. Look at my playlist on Spotify. You know, look at my bookshelves. It's just being imbued with whiteness. And it was something that we were taught by the family growing up, is like, you got to master this shit. Because you want to make sure you can work your way into any opportunity that comes your way. So you want to sound right, you want to dress right, you want to act appropriately, have all the social graces, so you can fit in. And it's like, not just recently, probably about a year ago, I kind of made this decision. You know, I think I'm done wearing, like, other than t-shirts, which is like made by poor people. I think I'm done wearing anything that's like white, like anything that's preppy. I'm not going to wear suits and ties anymore, period. Like, if my only option to go to a thing is to wear a t-shirt and jeans, that's what I'm going to wear. Till I, maybe build a wardrobe that's not white in its style and origin, which is going to take some work, thinking about it. It's like we're so enmeshed. There's no way around it. There's no way to really function without being able to code switch effectively.
I know when Rajeev and I first started dating, and I was hanging out with, it was a different context to me. Rajeev's extended family who immigrated from India in the like late 60s, early 70s, and then had kids and so on. People would refer to dating partners as like, oh, she's American, or, cousin so-and-so is dating an American. And that meant white. And I remember, my parents were Canadians, and so I had never really felt American, but that's how I was referred, and that's what people called me. And I remember just being really struck by that. American and whiteness go together.
Bonnie, you asked us what how the systemic conversation happened, whether it was brought up. I think it was relentlessly individualized. Like, we were always told every single topic of sin or this or that was just an individual thing, and it was something you were responsible for on your own, except for things like, they would say abortion or marriage, protecting a marriage or something like that. And I think it's important for all of us to just name the fact that Christians, white Christians, not all of them, but probably most of them in America, lost the cultural war to keep white supremacy enshrined in law. And there's still a lot of ground that has to be covered as far as law goes. But in the Civil Rights Act and things like that they were opposing, all that energy shifted toward abortion and marriage, where it didn't actually exist before that. So it was like, let's take all this war machine we've built to keep white supreme in the terms of law and systemic issues, and then just pick a different issue that we can tell ourselves that we're fighting the good fight. But I think for me, being a child and of inheriting that kind of switch, racism was never a systemic thing. It was just an individual thing. And I still hear that all the time with all the conversations I'm having.
Right. I think sin in general is individualized, and like you were saying, Alan, right? And so the cure for that is a personal relationship.
The cure for that is Jesus, unless it's this other topic, and then it's judges, right?
Yeah, but what about Jesus? Like Jesus's call to go and free the oppressors, that Jesus? I mean, what about Jesus is the cure for sin? In the former
if it's
context.
Protesters, then it's, law and order. If it's claiming that you are a white racist, then it's, well, Jesus was peaceful. Like it's really, using the different parts of scripture to fit your political narrative. I mean, that's been my experience, at least.
And that's important to name, that the oppression in our system will use everything it can to continue that stream of oppression, including Christianity.
Yeah. And I think we could argue that Christianity isn't just a tool, it's the thing itself. And that's what makes it really challenging. I mean, we're talking about provoking our progressive Christian imaginations. So what needs to be provoked? That's part of the question for today around whiteness and racism and anti-Blackness, which is a newish term to me. And I'm so glad that we're beginning to use that, because that's really what we're talking about. What needs to be provoked?
What needs to be provoked is the deep grief, that Juanita was talking about in the last episode. The deep grief that white people refuse to tap into, the anger that lives there, the outrage that lives there, that we classify as shame or rage or guilt, right? Instead of confronting what the deep grief that is underlying that. And the invitation, Bonnie, that you are asking us to do is reimagine church, reimagine Christianity. And I think the way that we have to start that process is by first acknowledging that it exists. That Jesus is not white. I love Rajeev's invitation for us to break up with white Jesus, and to again acknowledge that a lot of who has talked or who has claimed the lion's share of information about Christianity have been European white men, and we have to break up with them also. Jeff, in a few episodes ago, was talking about how the Great Awakening happened for him when he looked at his library at home and realized that the only people sitting on his shelf were people who looked and acted just like him. So I think that it starts with the recognition that whiteness has steeped itself in Christianity, and in some ways they're going to be hard to be pulled apart. And we have to acknowledge that.
You know, in the reading I've been doing lately, they talk about truth and reality and holding them in your hands. In your left hand, you're holding reality. In your right hand, you're holding truth. And how even race, even concepts like race itself, like the sorting system of oppression is not intelligent. It's absurd. It doesn't make sense on one level. Like, so in your right hand, holding truth, the truth is, like, race is a construct. We're all on this huge spectrum. There's 7.5 billion ways of being a human being. And there's, so that's true. So race is not a true thing, but it's a real thing. And in your left hand, you're dealing with the reality of people's experiences, of society. And so some people, on the right hand side want to be like, yeah, let's create a world where we recognize race as just this unintelligent, absurd kind of thing that separates all of us. And so we want to hold on to that. And it's comfortable, I think, for a lot of people like myself. And then on the left-hand side, it's like this reality that, like, no, this is a real thing that limits people's lives and benefits other people. And, grappling with that can also be disheartening for some folks. And so they said holding both at the same time is just really tiring. It can be really tiring to hold the truth and the reality together. And I think maybe that's what we need to start doing as spiritual communities, is recognizing, like, the different layers involved in all of this, and then teach ourselves about those things. I feel like we need to be taught and teach ourselves to walk, before we run a mile, sort of thing. I also worry because, did you see that thing on Twitter where a person was explaining how they came close to, like, white allyship, where someone was, they explained that they were in a progressive situation. And I think that they were talking about, like, homophobia and how there was homophobia in the system. And then the person cried and was sad that was the case and angry. And then there was, like, this snap back, this, like, reversal and pushback against things. So the person who talked about their experiences was ultimately punished for doing so. I really worry about some of our Christian circles who are just now entering this conversation. Like, whole churches that have never talked about this before in the history of their institution are now forced to have these conversations because people all in their church, and especially young people, are bringing it up and making them talk about it. That grief can lead to a snapback and consequences for folks who are in that community. I don't know. I have some worries around what the consequences are going to be like for institutions that don't have the staying power to continue having that deep journey.
I mean, consequences like innocent people getting murdered?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, but that's already happening.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
So that's a consequence that's been with us forever.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
Just like the re-entrenchment thing. How do you avoid that?
Well, look at Trump. I mean, what more re-entrenchment can you get post Barack Obama than Trump? So
God, it could get worse.
The real consequences, for sure, of people not having, which is something else Juanita talked about, not having a process by which to actually move from where we are to a transformed place. And there is grief and rage and other emotional experiences that are required to help lead us to that place of actual transformation, reconciliation, and healing. And
so I guess I'm just feeling we're woefully unequipped.
That's what it feels like to me. We're woefully ill-equipped, and our religious tradition, we've given it over.
That's right. Yep.
It's just imbued with it. What does it have to offer us to help us in this transformational process? I think that's part of the question. When the religion itself, especially in the American context, has been twisted to endorse this sin that nobody's talking about, how can we use it to help lead us?
I see what you're saying. Okay, that's so interesting.
Well, and being woefully unequipped as Christians is in our DNA.
Yeah.
Right? It is. But I mean, going back to even Jesus, we as humans were woefully unequipped to handle the teachings, so woefully unequipped. We killed him for nothing.
That's right. We couldn't handle it.
You know? So it's like this is part of our painful process of evolution. We need to stop killing people for no reason. That's finally a reality. Thank God that light finally switched on. But yeah, we're always woefully ill-equipped for the next thing. That doesn't mean we don't do it.
Right. And we're way behind too. I mean, look at the history of the Christian church. It had to evolve with an influx of new people. Right? The beginning of Christianity was primarily Jewish in its religious structure, but as it got influxed with people who were non-Jewish, it had to change. It just had to. The whole thing fell apart. Same thing happened when you had the split from Catholicism to Protestantism. It had to either, if the function of that organization continued, it would have to segregate a whole group of people. So it was either die or change or segregate. And I feel like maybe the problem is that we're not, I don't want to say, this is something I'm processing. So forgive me if something's wrong that I say, just, pounce on it, because this is something that I'm really working through in my head right now, is the idea of space. Is that a lot of the people that are calling for nuance in this conversation are saying that because they got called a racist on Facebook or Twitter. Well, honestly, if you're looking for nuance and if you're looking for education and you're going to Facebook and Twitter, that's your problem. It's like going to Sesame Street to try to study for your doctorate. Like, that's not the place for it. It's where are your relationships? Where are you having those real conversations? And I feel like if the church realized that, I think in connection with our churches, why are we going to church? And if we're not going to church for race relations or learning how to be anti-racist or learning how to see all this stuff, then we abandon it and we move to a place that will do it. And eventually the church will die or figure it out and have to work it out. And I feel like we're not analyzing the spaces that we're going. We're going down the wrong pathways to get that information and then throwing away the whole system because it wasn't there. Well, I'm not going to, again, to use an overtired reality, if I'm looking for a flat screen TV and I'm going to the supermarket, it's impossible. I can't find one. It's not there. And the church needs to analyze, is this really there? Like, we're saying all this stuff. We're talking about race and we're talking about reconciliation and salvation and all the things connected with Jesus, but are we really offering that? And if we're not, then, rebrand, figure it out, because you're going to the wrong places.
The only thing I want to pounce on there, Jeff, is don't bash Sesame Street, man. The answers are in Sesame
Elbo's
Street.
It's been slaying lately, apparently.
Agreed.
Been saying.
Right. And as a starting point, just like I think that hearing conversations on social media is a starting point. But if you're trying to stay there to get your answers, then you're going to do yourself a wild disservice, because first of all, you're going to allow yourself to easily separate because your comfort is primarily, and when I say you, I'm saying everyone who's listening who's white like me, like your comfort will be challenged. And if that's uncomfortable for you, but you still want to learn, then go to another place. And that's fine. I mean, you don't have to be called out, but recognize that when you are called out, because you probably will in some space or whatever, that is not the only place to learn. It's not your only source. And to say that our public conversation, I think, does not allow for nuance, and it is hard, and you can give up easily. But again, there's other spaces that are available, that social media, news rhetoric, the public sphere in terms of a national conversation is not always the best place to go to start that conversation. Go to smaller communities. Like, it's why we all are in the work that we're doing. It's why we're doing things like intersections to provide safe, small spaces where people can kind of, say things that may be a little questionable, because those are part of the process, but you don't do that in certain spaces because you have to recognize that there's other people who are real victims of these things that we're talking about. There are people that are in these spaces that are experiencing this on a real day. So of course they're going to be upset. Of course they're going to jump on you. And I don't know. I those are things that I'm working through.
It's
so
the
rant over.
Conversation that I'm having right now about like what church is for. And I think church is at its best when it allows people to take their masks off and really discover who they are and what's involved in making them who they are. Church is
maybe not a good analogy.
Okay,
right
yeah,
now.
well, I just meant like your internal mask.
Don't
like
take your mask off at church,
sense,
everyone.
Not in the coronavirus sense. And church is at its worst.
I think he's talking about the Klan sense.
Oh my God. Oh, okay.
I wasn't, but that's a good one too.
Church is at its worst when it's just creating a consumer-oriented culture that is sold to everybody and everybody's forced to ingest it and become it. So maybe church is meant to be small and weird, and like people are just learning to take their masks off and just be who they are, like and letting, like, fostering an environment where that can happen for people of all different kinds. But that's a radically different understanding of Christianity than the one that I think operates in our culture at the moment.
Well, are we equating Christianity with church?
Yeah, okay, that's true.
I mean,
Bonnie,
really
if you want to
interesting.
kill
We went
Christianity
straight
right now, go ahead.
Well, we went straight to the containers that we are comfortable
Yeah.
with and that we know about. Christianity is way bigger than that. So I'm asking about Christianity in general. You know, Christianity, well, even American Christianity. Because there are Christianities, and I think it's really important for us. That's one of the problems of whiteness, is that we keep sort of thinking all means white, and it doesn't. There are so many Christianities across the world, and in the United States, Christianities formed alongside the slaveholder religion. That's where we, or in the Americas anyway. That's where we get liberation theology, which is, a powerful, not slaveholder religion or white religion, white Christianity.
There is no reconciliation for that, because there is no starting point of healing for that kind of Christianity in America, because it began as a slaveholder religion. So reconciliation is when you go back to something that has been healthy, has been broken, and gets put back together. And if one of the main expressions of Christianity in America started out with excluding people, there is not reconciliation. There might be repentance, but you're not reconciling to something that was healthy and whole at the beginning. I think I'm hearing what Bonnie's saying a little bit more now.
I don't mean to be a peddler of sequel conversations. However, perhaps a follow-up to this would be, white supremacy in progressive Christianity, because I feel like at this point, evangelicalism is kind of an easy target. And I know, 4 out of the 5 of us here have things heavily invested in progressive Christianity, being ministers yourselves. And I think that perhaps that would be a good follow-up conversation.
That sounds great.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't want to talk about myself, just the past, just other people. Okay, fine.
Oh, yeah, I can't wait for that conversation.
Well, I mean, do we have any final thoughts? I think that
My final thought is sort of in line with what Bonnie's talking about. I'm looking for the Jesus who continues to call us to, if we have to, walk away from our friends and family. The one who says, if they cannot hear you, then honey, bye. Like, move on. Because I think the biggest problem with our culture in general in the United States and Christianity is that we believe that we are above reproach. We do not think that we are fallible in some ways. And the moment that we feel discomfort, we either shut it off or we cry, hoping that it will stop, whatever. It's like the feeling is walk away or cry, and then maybe we don't have to talk about the uncomfortable things. But Jesus was constantly calling us into those uncomfortable places and reminding us that this following of him might require our whole lives, everything. And that is something that if we're going to talk about faith, if we're going to talk about what it means to be a Christian, not an institutional, religious person, but a Christian, it will require your body on the line. And I think that that's what the work of being an anti-racist is inviting us into, putting everything on the line, our relationships, our time, letting go of information that we thought was real that really wasn't, and our bodies. It requires all of us to do this work and to confront this demon.
I think examining the idolatrous parts of our lives, to use a triggering word, but just ask yourself, what are the things that you idolize that are enshrined and seem permanent? Really flip those things over. And also, I'm saying this a lot lately, is take care of yourselves. There's a lot happening in the world. It's long past due. If you feel like you're late to the game, you're here. But take care of yourself. Your spirit, your wellness is really important to the movement. It's really important for you to be your fullest self too, because that's what the fight's all about. So it doesn't matter your skin color, your wealth. We need you to be you, and we need you to let others be who they are too.
Like to be white, at least in the current context, is to also be racist. And being able to say that out loud to whoever's listening, I'm a racist, and I'm also involved in anti-racism work with as much strength as I can muster, which means that I have to oppose things inside of myself, like constantly. It's not just for me, but it's for the next generations that I do this work, because I may not get there. But I'm hoping that whatever is done today will bear fruit in next generations.
Just wanted to say ditto to everything Rajeev said in particular. I feel like there's this place that we can access that underlies all of the like using terminology that might sound weird at first, but like the status play on the outside and reaching in toward something really deep and genuine. That's hope for all of us. And really connecting, like realizing that there are portions of us that are true and deep and genuine, and really getting centered on that allows us to do this work without shying away in shame or fear or things like that. And the more we do that for ourselves, the more we can do it for other people. So thank you, Rajeev, for bringing that front and center.
I would just say, wherever you are, like, be aware of the space that you are encountering and the space that you occupy and the spaces that you create, and really ask yourself if those spaces match your ideology. And are they really perpetuating the things that you want to see in the world? Because it has to be more than just your words. And I think we do that in a lot of variety of different ways. And just one last thing. One thing that struck me, Bonnie, when you were talking is I feel like as evangelicals, we should be better trained for this, because we're so used to saying that we're a piece of crap. And that, when you say I'm a racist, like we always said I'm a sinner. We always that was a central part of what we were doing. And yet we can't do it with this particular issue. And I think that that's important. I think to acknowledge that we are sinners. Let's say the sinner's prayer, or let's say the racist prayer. Let's change it around. We'll change all the words. And, God, we come to you. I'm a racist. Forgive me for that. Give me the strength that we need from the Spirit. Whatever prayer we had at the altar call, let's switch it around. All right. So let us know what you think. Add your voice to this particular conversation by commenting at the show notes at irenicast.com/170. That's irenicast.com/170. Also in the show notes, you'll find relevant links and a complete list of all the other ways to like, follow, and contact the show. That's irenicast.com/170. And if you'd like to lend your voice specifically to this conversation, this coming Monday on July 13th at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard, join us for our Facebook Live, where we will continue the conversation. If you can't make it live, but you'd like to give your input, you can email us at podcast@irenicast.com. That's podcast@irenicast.com. On the other side of music, we're going to be playing another round of I Would But. Hello, we are on the other side of the music, and we're going to be playing I Would But. And how this is going to work is we say something that we genuinely would want to do, but something's holding us back. And our other co-hosts will offer what could possibly be holding us back. And the last time we did this, I was super mean to everyone, and everyone was super nice to me. And I'm still holding a lot of guilt for that, which I guess is appropriate when we're talking about whiteness. And let's do this. So we're all gonna say something, and who wants to go first for this one?
I'll go first. All right, so I would go to space, but
you're already there.
I've seriously thought it would be so fun to do that. I've always wanted to be an astronaut.
But Space Force cannot get you there yet.
I was going to go along those same lines, but however, space is also militarized now, so.
And I would say, but, their sound doesn't carry in space, and we need your voice here.
Hey, kudos, Alan's. Kudos, yeah.
Oh, maybe I'll go anyway. Just buy a ticket.
Okay, I would get a tattoo, but because
I've never gotten a tattoo. I thought you did it by this point. I've just been all talk up to
and serious plans. So I would get a tattoo, but
okay,
but you can't figure out what you're gonna get a tattoo of.
But that would tip your hipster credentials over the top, and you would then lose your hipster credibility.
But it's more fun to talk about than actually do.
Wow. Damn.
But you're trying to figure out how to do it without culturally appropriating anything.
Very nice. Actually, yeah, I am getting tattoos that are culturally appropriate. Dug into my own. I'm gonna get a labyrinth from France on my chest, and then eventually a peacock and a lion from the Book of Kells, where the peacock is grabbing the mouth of the lion, so like the symbol of life and of everlasting life, snatching life out of the jaws of power. I think that's something that's really beautiful. I want to have eventually.
That is cool. Keep talking about it.
It hasn't happened because I'm worried that there's some really big consequences to having tattoos that we just haven't discovered yet. You know, like you can't just shoot a bunch of needles into your body and then like nothing happen, no consequences follow up later on in life. You know what I mean?
Alan, I feel like if you were just a couple years older, you would already have a not of this world tattoo surrounded by tribal design.
Oh,
by like tribal, like a tribal tattoo.
Oh, don't
you
do
totally
that to
would.
me.
Just a couple years older, you would have it already, and you would be figuring out how you needed
or
it.
like peace in some other language that I don't speak and have never read in my life.
Right, that really says
probably.
apple.
Hey, at least you'd fit in better at the gym.
We're probably triggering listeners right now. We're not thinking about you. We've never seen your tattoo.
Tina Fey's like, oh yeah, my friend, she just got a tattoo. It's the Chinese character for Celtic symbol.
I like that. That's good stuff.
I would be on Queer Eye, but
you'd break the internet.
But what would they change? You're already on point.
I love you.
But they don't have a show if the people that they're trying to helps the hosts instead.
Amen.
I think, yeah, that's just something you should do. I can't think of a... Yeah. I'll call them for you.
Make it happen, Bonnie. Make it happen. I feel like Karamo and I would be.
We'll send them one of your Thursday reflections.
There you go. If you're listening, everybody contact Queer Eye and tell them that Casey should be on it. There you go.
That's hilarious.
All of our listeners, let's mobilize.
Let's mobilize. We can do
for
it.
the cause.
I would be a stand-up comedian, but
you prefer to sit down.
Oh my god.
Damn. Oh man.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
I was.
But dad jokes are not in.
Ooh. I was gonna say, but drunk bar patrons are too easy of targets.
Oh man, I'm going back and forth on what I should say.
Bonnie, you got him good. That was really
I know, and
good.
nobody can hear you laughing. Laugh in the microphone so people know you're laughing.
Who, me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I could just watch Bonnie and Rajeev go do that to each other like for a whole show. Just talk to each other.
I
It's
could
so
too.
funny.
I could seriously just listen to them.
If we just recorded ourselves walking around the house all day during these quarantines.
Be a stand-up duo, both of you. Combine the act.
Right.
There you go. That's my answer. But the act wouldn't be as good without Bonnie.
Yeah.
I remember, Bonnie, there was one time that it was you and I and Rajeev, and you guys were like hitting each other hard, like joking around. And
Yeah.
and Rajeev left the table. I said, "Are you okay?" And Bonnie was like, "Yeah, this is our life together." I was like, "Yes, this is awesome." Yeah.
Our poor kids. Did everybody go?
No, Jeff didn't go.
I was just going to say, then the act wouldn't be good if Bonnie wasn't a part of it.
Aw.
Because she's the butt of all my jokes.
Wow.
Maybe a little sampling of what Casey's talking about. We'll just let you two talk for a little bit. We'll listen.
Seriously.
It's like nobody laughed. Everyone got afraid. Like I just insulted the Pope to his face.
That's right.
Yeah, seriously. Like 3 years ago, I want to say 3 years ago, we were sitting at it was an ink or whatever, or art place in Sacramento, and you guys were talking, and I was like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Like it was funny. It was I tried not to just have my jaw down. It was so funny watching you both go at each other. It's hilarious.
That's what love looks like, honey.
For an 8, I think so. Probably.
Yeah, it is. It totally is. And what I love about Bonnie is she holds her own. Like she's not backing down for
Exactly.
1 second.
You're right. That's exactly what it felt like when Rajeev said something. I was like, "You just insulted the Pope to their face. How dare you?" Like Bonnie's completely unfazed. She gave it back way more.
And Bonnie's like, "Come for me." Yeah, she's like, "I am unfazed."
What you don't realize is it's only safe for me to do that in public.
Oh, this is ending in a few minutes. Don't worry. Yeah. Yesterday, by the way, was Loving Day,
Oh yeah.
commemorating the Supreme Court decision to make interracial marriage illegal, I guess, across the entire United States. 1967, I think, is when that happened. The state of Virginia, which is where Rajeev and I first lived after we got married. And so, yeah.
Well, and we were told, the county we lived in at the time, that they hadn't ratified that law, so that our marriage was still illegal, or was illegal in that county.
But we didn't get married anyway, not legally.
We were just like, whatever.
Wow.
Yep.
See, I need to hear stuff like this because everyone's like, racism's a thing of the past, and it's institutionalized in law still.
Yeah, we had a wedding, but no legal marriage.
Wow.
Yeah. And KKK rallies were 4 or 5 miles from our house, 1992.
Tri-county rallies.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still not deemed a terroristic organization, by the way, in American law.
Well, they're in the White House.
That's right. That's right.
Yep.
So pretty hard for it to be deemed a terrorist organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you guys for sharing all of that. Oh my god.
All right, Jeff, we're all hopped up on our anti-racist rhetoric. and it's your turn.
It's your turn, Jeff.
And it's your turn.
Yay! Good for me. That's great. This is a great place to be. I would say something, but no.
Fair enough.
Okay, so I'm going to preface this. This is not a genuine desire. In fact, this is the opposite of a genuine desire in my life, but I'm curious to see how everyone will respond to this. So,
Okay, you're not
just want to
playing
put
the
that
game
out there.
then.
I don't care. I can change it.
Yeah, you can do it. however you
Rajeev
want.
changes it all the time.
That's true.
And then, yeah, so I'm gonna jump on that plane or whatever. Okay, I would join the military, but
bone spurs are fixable.
I don't know if I get that.
Yeah, I don't either.
You're not very good at following the rules.
That's true.
But you can't handle, bad authority. That's what I thought. Yeah, you don't do well with.
I thought you were going to come at with, but you can't handle the truth. It's like my bone spur comment.
I was going to say, but you're too committed to your nonviolent whiteness that it's upset any sort of conflict.
There we go. Man, one of these days I'm gonna like set the table for just a barrage of meanness with one of these answers. I'm gonna think about it, and the next time we do the segment, maybe I just have some. Maybe I need to incorporate some more
punishment
like S&M
desires
in my life or something.
Yeah, we can talk about that later.
Yeah, maybe we're just revealing too much of myself here. Let's end this here. I've said too much. That'll do it for us this week. If you enjoy Irenicast and you would like to join the work we are doing, please consider donating to our PayPal link at irenicast.com/PayPal. We're committed to keeping the show for free for listeners, but there are costs involved and your financial support helps. That's irenicast.com/PayPal. Irenicast is also a nonprofit organization, so your donations are tax deductible. You can also support the show by simply making sure that you've subscribed on whatever platform you listen on. And if the platform allows it, leave a rating and or review. We always love to hear from you. So for this week, I'm Jeff.
It's your boy, Alan.
I'm Bonnie.
It's Casey.
And this is Rajeev.
Thanks for joining the conversation.